Good morning, my friends. Welcome to the channel. My name is Josh Hendry with Mister Hen's Art Skills, and you are watching me prepare for Graphic Novel Pro. It's a class that's going to be taught by Jake Parker and Sean Crystal with SVS, the School for Visual Storytelling. Starts on January 22nd, and I'm just practicing in the mornings, preparing for that, getting ready for that. And then I will also be recording as I do the assignments or the different aspects of the class. So you can follow along and get a sense for if that's something you might want to do in the future. I have heard incredible reviews about it. And for me, even though I'm teaching full-time, even though I'm taking classes to get my North Carolina art teaching license, and I have a full plate with my family, I still thought that the opportunity was too good to pass up, and I just want to learn this art form even better. I've produced one comic, The Legend of Hairpan Origin. I wish I had my copy with me to show you. So their advice, I think, will be to create my own story, just to learn some of the techniques without being held back by my by my own story and what I want to do. And I think that that's probably wise to take their advice. So even though I eventually want to do my own comic, I will probably end up doing something just specifically for the class so that I can really pay attention to the things that they're telling me, put them into practice one good time, and get that experience under my belt so that I can maximize my learning opportunity. I really want to get as much out of the class as I can, and I've heard them say more than once that it's a little bit easier to I guess, it's not that you can't do your own story, you certainly can, but it's a little bit easier, I think, to create a story using the methods and the techniques and the things that they're telling you. And like anything, it's good to learn the basics right before you jump into the deep end. It's good to get going, which that's not my nature. It's against my nature. I share with my students all the time that when I was learning how to ride a bike, I got the training wheels off and I could ride with no training wheels. I immediately tried to start racing, and I ended up flying down my street. We lived in Florida at the time, and I slammed into my neighbor's car. I kind of started turning and I couldn't really turn it back because I was leaning and I didn't have my balance squared away the way that you do after doing this for years and years. And so I slammed into the neighbor's car. And back then, this would have been in the very early 80s. Most cars were made out of metal. They weren't made out of plastic. So that dent that I put in their door was pretty significant, and my parents had to repair that. So I have a tendency of leaping before I look, of trying to go faster than I should, of not just slowing down, taking my time, understanding that learning is a process, that once you learn you can go faster, but you've got to slow down to learn. And take your time, get the most out of it as you can. And I think of learning in itself as the project. I think so many times I've wanted to think of the project that happens after the learning, which means obviously you try to skip ahead. But no, the project is the learning, and that's enough of a project. You don't need to accomplish the next thing. Just learn. It's good enough. So that's what I'm going to try to do. And I've talked yesterday, if you watched yesterday's stream, you know I was talking about how subtle things have to be on the face to communicate what you're trying to communicate. And just, especially around the eyes, just a simple tilt in a certain direction will change whether the person looks happy or angry. And I'm not sure I got it on this one, unfortunately. But maybe I can clean it up a little bit with my pencil. Hopefully I can. We'll see. So the angle of the eyebrows and the angle of the eyes are off on this, but that's why you do this in stages. You do the lighter version, and while the lighter version does not capture it, you can use the lighter version to realize, well, I wanted the eyebrows not to be facing down, so now I take my black colored pencil and I don't reiterate the part that I don't like. And so you kind of edit here, and this honestly I find is very satisfying because it starts to, if you've ever tuned a guitar before, it has a similar pull in my heart as to when I tune a guitar. You get the sense that you're off by a little bit, and then when you get it dialed in, there's like a sweet resonance to it, that just a harmony. And it's the same way visually. And I don't know what the link is between music and visual as far as that goes, or why those two things correspond in my mind and in my heart, but they do. Yep. So this eye is way more successful than this one. The pupil is kicked off to the side. It's not oriented in the eye the right way. It looks like it's halfway. Like the eyelid covers too much of it, right? You should start to see the circle go around. The tilt here is good, but because the pupil is off, it doesn't have the same open sincerity. This one almost looks like you're that's how I describe that emotion. So is that an emotion? I don't think so, but that's how I'm describing it. It's kind of funny. It's been part of my journey to be able to describe emotions, just in the battles that I've had with my own habits and things. It's emotions are such an important indicator of what really is going on, and if you can identify the emotion correctly, it helps you identify the source of the emotion more accurately. So if you're feeling frustrated, obviously the source of that is going to be different than if you're feeling sad. Or oftentimes we feel more than just one thing. This is not communicating joy to me at all. So that's interesting. It's a little bit better. There's just more of a tilt and more of a close of the eyes. It's also interesting because I'm left-handed. It's much easier to draw right-handed eyes, so that's kind of funny. This almost works back against my natural motion, so that's something that I will also be learning to kind of account for as I draw. I just need to remember that. That's not horrible. But it's certainly not completely capturing that idea the way that I had hoped to. So, interesting. But what I was saying is, it's just interesting because emotions can be very complex. And you can feel more than one emotion at the same time. In fact, what I love here is, look at this. You got fear and sadness equals devastation. You got fear and surprise equals spooked. You've got joy and sadness is faint hope, which is a hilarious face. that makes me laugh. That's like when you were, like you had just gotten your ice cream and you're like happy and it falls off your cone. It's like this moment of transition where you're like, yeah. And, it's just so great. I don't know. But we're complex, and emotions don't stay like we're locked in this emotion. It's like a rhythm, where the emotion hits on a beat, but we're in a constant state of flux and transition between notes, and we're just emotional creatures, and it's important to understand that. And I think if you don't understand your emotional, or if you're not growing, I guess I should say, in your understanding of how your emotions come to you, for lack of a better term or way to say it, I think you are a little bit at a disadvantage when it comes to managing your emotions. I mean, if you don't know what's causing you to feel this way, it can be very desperate. You can feel very desperate. At least I can. And I think that's where, bad habits come in for sure. You, instead of focusing on the real problem, you think you're the problem. It's so easy to think, oh, you're the problem. Well, if you're not feeling right, certainly that's an indicator and one that needs to be paid attention to. But the idea that you are the only thing in the equation is super false. There's nothing more false about that. Now, I don't say that because I think you can just blame anybody you want to, or come up with reasons for why you do the things you do, and it's okay to do anything you want to because you don't have to manage your emotions. I don't mean to imply anything like that. Excuse me. But I certainly understand when people struggle to identify where their emotions are coming from, and the poor behaviors typically are the poor habits that kind of arise as a result of not being able to identify that stuff. It's kind of close to laughter. I can believe this person is laughing, I think. It's interesting. So I know for me, before I really started to think about my emotions, I could tell you I was hungry and if I was angry. Those two things I knew very clearly. And if I knew I was angry, it's because somebody did something to me, or something didn't work the way it was supposed to, or the way I thought it was supposed to. And hungry meant I don't have enough food, I need to go get some food. And then I could combine those two into hangry. So that was the beginning, I guess, of the journey. And an early one that was easy for me to identify was frustrated. And that was good, because when you feel frustrated, that's honestly a little bit different than anger. It can lead to anger, certainly. But when you're frustrated, it's because you're expecting a certain outcome, and that outcome did not happen. And it could be something simple, like you're nailing a nail in a board, and you're expecting to hit the nail clean, and you don't. Or even worse, you hit your thumb with the hammer, and you're half shouting out because of the pain, and you're half shouting out because you're so daggone frustrated that you couldn't even hit the nail on the head. So in relationships, I think you go into even more detail to kind of dig in and see how emotions are a good litmus paper for your relationships. I mean, are your relationships bringing you joy and laughter, encouragement? And that doesn't mean that everything's happy all the time, but you get encouraged sometimes at your lowest points, and it's friends who help encourage you or pick you up or speak words of understanding or whatever it might be. So I just think if you're going to tell stories, it's really helpful to first of all be able to identify your own kind of emotional landscape, but then also to be able to communicate that visually, like these faces here. And I said yesterday, I think something to the effect of, I will probably not remember how to do any of this, even though I've done it one time and I've been through the process. There's so much subtlety in each one of these. It's absolutely amazing. And so it will take a long time to be able to get this repertoire, so to speak, of emotions into my drawings. So I look forward to continuing to work on that. Now, this is interesting. I didn't look at this page yesterday, Here are the big ones: anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, and surprise. So it's kind of cool that you can then take those, right? So anger, disgust, fear, joy, sadness, and surprise, right? These are kind of at a level 3, so to speak. But you could take it all the way to a level 4, but you could also dial it down. So these, like sternness, disdain, concern, satisfaction, dejection, and alertness, is kind of interesting. So you're alert, but then it could go up to wonder, surprise, and then shock. Dejected, oh, that's sad. I would have thought that was lower or higher, amped up, but I would have thought, that's interesting. Dejection and melancholy, I would have thought of those as being flipped, I guess. Melancholy as being like a low hum sadness. Dejection feeling like a little bit more of a punch to it. I don't know if I'm correct, but I would have thought that was different. Not, I don't know. Okay, and then sadness. This seems extreme for sadness, but maybe not. And then grief. And maybe he is amping it up on purpose just a little bit because you're storytelling. Satisfaction, sure. Amusement, joy, and laughter. That's good. Concern, anxiety. It's interesting. Anxiety and melancholy. It's interesting. I think of them as kind of states of being, not just like beats of emotion. Like fear, like if something surprises you, fear, it lasts for a couple of beats and then usually you kind of regulate, right? If it's disgust, usually and you turn away from whatever the source is if you can, and that's kind of like a momentary. Anger is like, maybe you peak up to rage and lash out or something. Anger you can stew on for a while, but typically that's when it's starting to dial back. So these are kind of like, almost like states of emotions, and then like surprise, sadness, joy, fear, disgust, anger. I think of them as like more like beats or shorter windows of. Same thing with like rage and revulsion and terror and laughter and grief and shock. All of those kind of seem to be on the amplitude wavelength of intensity, and then we kind of come down and we tend to kind of flow in these emotions for the majority of our day, right? And then you might have these peaked out emotions that come. So if I'm thinking about that from a storytelling perspective, it's almost like having a puppet on your hand. You're going to talk, kind of like in this tone. So if you're sad, or you're happy, the happy would be the spike. And let's see, the happy could be joy, I guess. When it's a puppet, you tend to express by opening up the mouth. So that's kind of, I don't know. It's interesting. And I don't know why I'm thinking about it in puppeteering terms. That's also kind of interesting. All right. I'm going to go ahead and work on a portfolio piece. I'm going to put the emotions away for a little bit. Or should I put the emotions away or should I keep cranking? One of the things you have to learn to do is push through and finish. So I've got 4 sets of 4. That's 16. So I've got to here. Yeah, I've only got 4 more to go. Maybe I'll go ahead and knock this out real quick. Just to say I got it done. And then I'm going to move on to the portfolio piece. So that might be later on. At least I think that's what's going to come next. I probably should plot a plan. I'm going to draw these a little bit bigger than the last set since I've got only 8 to do. We're going for dejection here. Dejection's an interesting one. Because the eyes certainly are focused. I mean, when you feel dejected, I think of almost tuning out to another place. Like the dejection almost is intense enough to sort of make you lose your focus. But what I'm seeing here is the eyes still being pretty focused. Just kind of interesting. And I wonder on the emotional scale if, like, sometimes, like, when I look at pictures of people and the emotions that they say, like when you have an illustrated chart, like of photographs or whatever, I wonder if I'm just not good at reading people, or something like that, because sometimes I'm like, that doesn't really look like what I would have thought of for dejection. Kind of, I think of dejection as being like you're a little bit more sad than focused. Like you look a little more bummed out than that. That's the way I think of dejection. But maybe dejection is more like you feel like you could have done something better about it, or you hasn't sunk in that you're sad yet. I don't know. Dejection seems to me like you are in the sadness, like you are in the, I don't know. It's just interesting. And maybe this face does look more sad. Maybe because I might be not, maybe I've drawn the corners of the mouth down too far or something. I don't know. That's interesting. Weird. All right. Melancholy. This is also weird. Like, melancholy is like, I don't think of melancholy. Well, it is kind of pouty, I guess. Think of it as being more blue, like you're almost depressed. And maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Maybe if melancholy leads to depression, I don't know. I certainly think of the eyebrows as doing that. And the eyes tilting like that. And I think, some comic book artists might not even, might not focus as much on this, depending on like what the comic is. Like for instance, Spider-Man. You would never know what emotions he's feeling from looking at his face, right? And that's kind of one of the nice things about being able to draw superheroes is sometimes you don't have to go so in depth. At least not historically, you didn't. Now, I think emotions are much more valuable, maybe, in this kind of the social economy of storytelling. Like people really are keyed in on how they're feeling and what's causing their emotions. And maybe we just live in a time and a place where it's a little bit more important to acknowledge the emotions in your storytelling and be able to connect with your viewers on that level, or your readers on that level. I remember early on, before I had ever gotten any professional gigs, like serious professional gigs as an artist, probably still in college, just starting to become aware that certain artists could communicate emotion very effectively with facial expressions. And when that dawned on me and I started to explore how to put some emotion into my characters, I remember just being in awe of how connected I started feeling to the characters on the page. Like, oh my goodness, like it just changed the storytelling aspect of it. It's like now there was humanity in this artwork. So, like, this person is no longer, like, you can't get that from Spider-Man. And for whatever reason, and I love Spider-Man. I read them a lot when I was younger. But as I got older, it was sort of like you had to guess what emotion he was feeling based on the action and the activities happening within the story. You weren't going to look at Spider-Man's face. Now, you might look at Peter Parker's face and get some indication, but you weren't going to look at Spider-Man and see him struggling. You were just going to see him with the Spider-Man mask, and that was going to be it. And I remember at some point, I couldn't acknowledge that this was what was going on, but I think I was possibly losing interest in some comic books because I couldn't connect with them. And so I have said in the past on the channel that I had trouble with comic books because they just didn't have an emotional connection. And one thing I will say, like Calvin and Hobbes, absolute one of my favorites. And the emotions that come through those illustrations are so simple and yet powerful. I mean, like, could make me laugh. Because I had been in, oh my goodness, I can't even remember his teacher's name off the top of my head, but I had been in those classes before. I had been daydreaming before. I had felt the tyranny of the boring class, and all of that emotion was just right there on the page and expressing so many things I had felt before in a way that Spider-Man never did. So, one of the teachers of the Graphic Novel Pro class is Jake Parker. And I have not followed Jake Parker's work probably the way a real fan should. But I will tell you, my introduction to Jake Parker let me know that I liked him as an artist. He did this comic, and it was released, I think it may have been released in the Flight anthology, but maybe I'm wrong on that. By Kazu Kibuishi. I'm just completely destroying that name. But it was called The Robot and the Sparrow. And that comic made me cry. And you're sitting there going, why in the world would I feel any emotion for a robot? And this is really interesting, especially today, because this was done years and years ago, probably 2 decades or more ago. He created this story, and robots were nowhere near as developed as they are now, and it's a little bit creepy. But the robot landscape, I'll just say, is pretty intense. From like dog robots to drones to human-looking robots, it's just at a level where it's hard to kind of feel connected to the robots that you see out there. Like, who feels compassion for a drone? And now probably Pixar will come out with some movie and try and make us all feel sorry for a drone. But his story was so human for being about a robot and a bird. Like, most people don't have huge concern for birds other than, they're sweet and they fly around and they're nice and, but they don't, you don't feel emotionally moved unless that bird is there for a while. Like, we had a bird that was on our porch that built a nest, and you know, you can be more connected over time. All I'm saying is you typically, they're birds. They're flying around in the air, and they tend to be not like pets or anything like that. I don't know what I'm saying about birds, but anyway, you got a robot and a bird, a sparrow. Okay, not kind of the epitome of things that you would get emotionally connected to, right? And I don't mean to say everybody's cruel and they don't love birds. That's not what I'm saying. But then the story is about the bonds between the two of them, and then having to go without that bond. My goodness. That junk is crazy. Because if you've ever lost anybody you love, you know how bad it hurts. And you alone know how bad it hurts because you alone had that relationship with that person. There's not another person on the face of the planet that can totally understand how bad it hurts. They may have lost somebody, but they didn't lose the person you lost, and they certainly didn't lose the relationship you had with them. That is a very personal pain. And for whatever reason, the robot and the sparrow was able to key in on that. And it was Calvin and Hobbes-ish. And honestly, the robot had like a little digital readout face, so you could get some emotional read. It wasn't like a Iron Man robot where you can't see any emotion. But that, and just the storytelling. And I'll probably go back and read that before our Graphic Novel Pro class starts, just as a reminder of the humanity of the whole thing. I haven't read it in years, so I'm sure there are parts of it. But the significant thing that I remember is how moved I was by two things that wouldn't, under normal circumstances, have a huge emotional pull for me. It's interesting too. Grief is. Here's something so interesting. Maybe this is what I'm thinking. How many people, while this drawing that I'm drawing expresses grief, and I've certainly felt grief, how many people feel this way on the inside, but they do not, like their face does not really communicate that? So this is kind of interesting to me because if it's like a super intense grief, like you may see sometimes on the news, if something horrific has happened, you might get an expression like this. But I remember when I got news of some horrible news, gut-wrenching, like life-changing, just like the worst news, I was in a state of shock. So my initial reaction wasn't this. Even though eventually my heart would feel this, I don't know if my facial expression ever got dialed into this grief, but that's exactly how I felt. So it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of weird. And there's something else very weird, that when boys are born, they get a flood of testosterone that washes over their brains, and it actually kills some of the synapses for emotional connectivity. And this is like a scientific thing that I've heard about. I'm not a scientist, so, fact check me on this. But my understanding is a wash of testosterone goes over the brain right at the moment of birth as kind of like a final exiting the womb sort of scenario. And what it does is it kills some of the emotional connectivity in the synapses. And what I guess scientists believe is that this is, the way they would describe it is probably different than the way I would describe it. But they describe it as kind of like a need for survival, in the sense of, when we were hunters and gatherers, they needed to be able to hunt. And so it was some process of evolution. I wouldn't describe it that way. I would think of it as God's perfect design, and his intentionality and his understanding of things that we probably don't even understand fully. And we're kind of doing our best to guess, but it was by his design, right? For whatever reason. So I wonder then if we don't possibly feel many of these things, yet our facial expressions are not connected as deeply to it. I just wonder about that, because I think I feel all of these things. I don't know that I always express them as, impactfully as this. And certainly some people are more stoic than others, and there's all of that to think about as well. But I just think it's so interesting. And I guess my own path with emotions, and what I've learned over the years is, like I said, when I first started learning about this stuff, I knew hunger and anger, and that was about it, at least in my own Rolodex of emotions. I could probably identify these other ones in other people a little bit more than my own self, but a little bit unaware, to say the least. So oh, it's the same thing. I gotta be careful with the eyes. It's easy for the pupils to communicate something, or the irises to communicate something you don't. The pupil's the dark part, right? The iris is the exterior part. Isn't that right? You would think an artist would know these things. And a better one probably would. Alright, let's see. Yeah, that totally jacked up the mouth. Okay, no problem. I think the eyes are a little bit... this one is alertness, so you're not quite in a state of surprise. You're in a state of awareness, right? You're focused, but you're also open to see and ready to turn your head to see if there's anything. You're listening. So I think of the face as being open for all information that might be coming. When you're alert, you're stationary in the same place and fielding all information that you can gather, I guess, from that spot. Tends to be what I think of when you're alert. But you could also, I guess, be trekking through the woods and be very alert, kind of constantly looking to see if there's a predator, if there's any danger, or oh, my friends, I am out of time for today. I gotta call it here. I gotta cut it. So I got 5 of these 8 done. I did joy and laughter. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I got 7 done. I got 3 more to go to finish out this page. Yeah, I may finish up. I may finish this up before I do my portfolio piece, and maybe it's too early to do the portfolio piece. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. But I want to thank you guys for joining me. Hopefully this was helpful for you in some way, shape, form, or fashion. I really enjoy just getting up before the day gets started and getting some of these things under my belt. It helps me feel like I've gotten a little bit closer to my goal, and that's a great feeling. So if you've got a creative project that you are hoping to accomplish and I can do anything to help you, put it in the chat below, or if you've got any questions either about art or my process or any number of things that you can think of, and if I can help, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much for joining, and as always, have a great day.